Playing Dark Souls is almost as easy as building a guitar. It's not. But as a fan of the trilogy, I enjoy challenging myself, and this time I'll be building a Dark Souls inspired electric guitar. I tried out quite a few new techniques on this build, and also some original features which I haven't seen any other guitar builder have done yet. So if you don't know the game, and you are here just because you enjoy watching woodworking and guitar building videos, stay tuned. I've picked ash wood for the body because of the pronounced grain, and maple with these ebony leftovers to make a laminated neck. As you can see, I'm really starting this build from scratch, so the first step was to prepare all my wood so it's flat, squared and cut into desirable dimensions. To make bigger pieces of wood like this flat across the whole length, I always use a router sled table. It's a much more trustworthy tool than my jointer or planer. I only use my planer later to remove the router marks and to get the wood to a certain thickness. With all my wood prepared, I could start working on my neck blank. I took a bit of a different approach when doing this laminated blank. It's basically something between a laminated neck and a solid piece neck. You will see what I'm talking about later, but the goal was to get the maple block to a shape resembling a letter H, at least a bit. The solid small section in the middle will play an important role as well soon. When the glue fully cured, I planed the blank and sketched the geometry of the neck. Then I routed a channel for a truss rod. In this build, the truss rod needs to be sunk 1.5 mm deeper than usual. It will be then covered with a strip of maple. This is all because of the fretboard, which will contain a thin channel in the middle, exactly in the location of a truss rod, in order for the LED strip to pass through. You are probably wondering, what on earth am I talking about? But again, you need to wait a while for things to make sense here on this build. So the reason why I wanted to leave this section of the neck blank non-laminated was to make it look like the coiled sword which is inserted in every bonfire. Bonfire is like one of the most notorious elements of the Dark Souls world, so this is the way I wanted to incorporate it into the guitar. I made inlays from thin pieces of ebony and walnut to make it resemble this doubly twisted section of the Coiled Sword. This part will eventually be right behind the heel of the neck, which then goes through the body. It would be best done using CNC, but since I don't own one, I had to do this by hand. So the result was a bit sloppy, but still satisfying after a few touch-ups. Now, I hope this was obvious from the intro. I want the fretboard to look like a Moonlight Greatsword, which is a weapon you can wield in every Dark Souls game and in other FromSoft games as well. I also wanted to make the fretboard shine whenever I want, exactly like in the game, so I decided to make it entirely of epoxy and support it with LED strip from within. This is something I haven't seen any luthier have done, and I actually don't get why. Yes, working with a thin piece of epoxy like this was a bit stressful because of how brittle it is, but overall it was really cool. I put twice as much epoxy than I needed for the fretboard, so I had a spare piece in case I screwed up, but that luckily didn't happen. If you ever will be cutting a piece of epoxy like this on a bandsaw, just count with a complete cleanup after the cut, and also wear a mask for sure. Just to make things clear, this will be a 7-string multiscale guitar, with a scaling from 27 inches on the bass side and 25.5 on the treble. I've made myself this radius routing jig to remove the bulk of the material and then proceed to the sanding block. I aimed for a radius of 14 inches. As I had my neck cut out and trimmed, I could glue the fretboard to its place. I used gluing epoxy. Then when the epoxy got cured, I used the flush trim bit again, this time to trim the fretboard, and the neck itself served as a guidance for the trim bit's bearing. After I carved the neck with a rasp, I proceeded to do the side dots of the fretboard. I just used normal nails, you know, cut them and filed them down. There was no intended inspiration when it comes to the shape of the entire body. Just to make it a bit unique, I shaped the bigger horn, that's the one closer to the side dots, in a way so it looks like the dagger of one of the Abyss Watchers. But that's not the most important reference. So I cut the body wings and then sanded them on my spindle sander. I had all my components prepared for the glue up. The dowels are there just to avoid slipping when the pressure is applied. It also helps to keep everything aligned well. I routed the cavities for pickups, and the next step was to do my favorite part of this guitar, and that's the eclipse design. The eclipse occurs in Dark Souls 3 after you defeat all Lords of Cinder. Dark Souls 3 is the first game of the trilogy I ever played, and it's also my favorite. The eclipse shape contains passage for another LED strip, and it will also be poured with epoxy. But to prevent the epoxy from leaking into the passage, I covered it with a thin piece of transparent acrylic plastic. The control cavity needs to be quite large because of the amount of electrical components which go in. That's a 9V battery, 1 volume pot, 2 LED switches, 1 3-way toggle switch which selects the pickup, tons of cables, and also a box for 8 AAA batteries which create 12 volts and supply the LED strips. I cut a piece of ash veneer and glued it on the headstock. Eventually it will get dyed black, just like the body. The next part of the build were the frets. However, a regular fret wire has these micro spikes, which are supposed to bite into the wood, I guess. But in my case, I would be afraid that these spikes could cause me a broken fretboard. So I filed all these spikes from my frets. Epoxy behaves more like a plexiglass when you try to press something in. It could really just snap, and when I'm this far in my build, I don't want to risk it. CA glue should do enough to hold the frets in their position. Fretwork is, for me, the most tedious part of guitar building. but it's almost the most important part, which basically determines how well the instrument will be playable. So, I've done my leveling, crowning, tool mark removal and polishing. This time I used a high grit sanding sponge to remove the file marks, and it worked like a charm. And I used steel wool to polish my frets. This will eventually increase contrast in the finish and make the wood figure really stand out. I used tape to mask the parts of the guitar I didn't want to get dyed, and then wiped on the Rubio Monaco Precolor Intense Black. Because it's Dark Souls, you know. As a clear coat and the final finish, I used Rubio's Oil Plus 2C Pure. I applied the oil home because room temperature will assure faster curing. Because the strings will go through the body, I tapped in the ferrules. This is the LED strip which goes through the whole fretboard. I used these single monorail bridges from Ibanez. I wouldn't recommend anyone to ever open the control cavity again. But one day it will be inevitable because of the batteries, you know. And the last part was the wolf ring knob. I cut down a piece of metal rod, drilled it and tried to engrave the same design like the wolf ring in Dark Souls has. So whoever plays this guitar should get his poise increased. I really must admit that given the fact that this was my first time engraving in metal ever, the result was actually not that bad. It was rather obscure. So rather than recognizing the lack of skill, I understood that the problem was just a small working space. So I repeated the whole process with a bigger piece of metal cylinder, and this time it was much better, and I was satisfied with the result. Eventually I did some basic setup, and I was pleasantly surprised with the string action being nice and low, and I think the end result looks phenomenal. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments, or you can text me on my Instagram. See you soon.